we're super excited to hear from Maddy Bartsch. We have her with us, and she is a farmer, educator, and organizer of decentralized textile economies based in Minneapolis. Maddy has helped a broad range of clients navigate local textile economies through projects like Minnesota Hemp Wool Project, the TRF Regional Fiber Sourcebook, the National Mill Inventory Survey, and as a Yarn Incubator for Fibershed. In addition to fiber systems, Maddy's work includes tackling food systems as the community connector for the Cannon River chapter of the Sustainable Farming Association. More recently, Maddy received a Farmer-Rancher SARE grant, which has enabled them to focus on 2 years of research around building a natural dye cooperative in the Midwest. Maddy speaks on the topic of local fiber systems and sustainable textiles and teaches fiber arts classes to learners of all ages throughout the Midwest. So Maddy, I'll turn it over to you, and super excited to hear more about these topics.
Thank you, Susan. Hey everyone, I'm Maddy. Use they and she pronouns, and I'm going to share my screen with you. Kind of as Susan said, Renee had mentioned kind of an interest in having Fibershed come, and and when I was putting this together, I wanted to think about something that was really something that everybody has. So as you can see, socks and climate change is the title of this presentation. So if you brought a sock or you're wearing socks, you can think about them as we go through this presentation together. But yeah, just a way to think about how we're all interconnected to our fiber systems, because it can seem really big. Climate change is really big, but we can zoom in on one small part of it right now as we talk. So I think starting with just what is a fiber shed is a good place to start. And that term may be new for some folks. If you've heard of a watershed, kind of a similar concept in that a fiber shed is a strategic geography where we bring awareness and connectivity to our natural textile resource base. So similar to what we do with a watershed, right? Like the Mississippi watershed. I actually know Mary. I'm in Prospect Park. So thinking about how all the water moves through this area, what I'm connected to, what goes down the drain, where that goes. It's kind of that way of thinking, but it's about textiles. Because in general, most of us probably buy our textiles pre-made. We go to a store to buy our socks. We go and purchase a shirt when we need a new one. And we don't see that whole cycle that got us to that textile. So the fiber shed is really about looking at within, kind of zooming into a specific area and saying, all right, let's look at how all the pieces are connected within that. Fibershed is also an organization, and so hence the Three Rivers Fibershed. And it's a place-based movement with over 50 global communities. So fiber sheds are kind of grassroots groups that pop up all over the world. And it's groups of people getting together who say, we want to pick a strategic geography, which I'll show you what the Three Rivers Fibershed strategic geography looks like in just a second, but saying, okay, we want to focus on this area, and we want to think about all the textiles, all the pieces of a textile economy that are in our area, and how do we pull them together and do so around natural textiles, around sustainability, around regenerative agriculture. So that's really kind of the basis of a fiber shed. So as I said, a Three Rivers Fibershed, our strategic geography is we have this very fancy illustration a friend did for us. So you can see Minneapolis and St. Paul right there. So our strategic geography, when our group sat down together in 2016 and said, all right, we want to make a Fibershed affiliate. We want to try to kind of pull all the pieces together. And we said, okay, what should we do? So we said, let's do a 175-mile radius around Minneapolis. So as you can see in our little dots here, we really wanted to make sure we went down to Decorah, Iowa, because the Vesterheim Museum has a really rich textile history there. We wanted to make sure we were getting Western Wisconsin, Eau Claire area. There's a lot of shepherds who live in that area. And there also was an existing fiber shed kind of up north near Bemidji. And so we said, you know what, we want to just go up to that sister chapter so that way we can cover the area that hasn't been covered yet. So when I talk about our strategic geography, when I talk about the Three Rivers Fibershed, you can go back to this image of seeing, okay, this is who I'm talking about. All the animals, the people, the land, the plants, the machinery that makes and spins, the hands that spin and weave. I'm talking about all those folks within this geography. So that's kind of, as we go through this presentation, kind of keep that in mind as we're talking about the different pieces. So then what a fiber shed's vision is, it's a different way to make textiles. It's instead of, maybe you are familiar with our current textile economies, our systems, and if you aren't, spoiler alert, they're awful. They are extractive, they are full of human rights abuses, water abuse, land abuse, just every way of being extractive as possible, petroleum based, run by, you know, huge groups that are focused on exponential growth and just taking and taking and taking at the cost of every living creature that is a part of the system. So that's where we are, but it's not where we started as people. And it's also not where we have to say, this is just how it is. We don't have to do that. And so what Fibershed envisions is this way where the impact from sheep to finished shirt is considered. So we think about everything that touches our textiles from soil to soil. And I'll show you in just a second kind of what a soil to soil system looks like. But essentially, we think about how they're grown all the way to how something breaks down at the end of the life cycle. If you're familiar with like a circular economy, cradle to cradle, that kind of concept where instead of making a shirt that is petroleum based, that is dyed with synthetic chemicals that pollute the watershed and water system where it's done, that impact the health of the community that actually makes the garments, and then it goes into our closets for, on average, people wear things 1 to 2 times before they throw them away. That's like an average thing. So I'm sure in this group, because you all are focused on the environment, sustainability, and change, that maybe you're like, what? But that is the truth. That's why something like fast fashion exists. And you have a wonderful person in your group, Renee, who knows a lot about fast fashion and those systems. And really the whole concept is there's, you know, multiple seasons, right? We have our spring clothes, we have our summer, we have fall, and we have winter. And generally how fashion and textile systems work, where there was one collection per season, right? That's when you would go say, yep, I need to get a new wool jacket, or I need to get a rain jacket, and that would be it. Well, what fast fashion has done is in the complete opposite direction, in the direction of exponential growth at the detriment of everyone else. There's like 52 new seasons. Every week there's new clothing in stores. So if you can imagine that a store like H&M or Zara or Forever 21, or even some of the bigger brands, you know, like J. Crew and things, there's new clothes every week, every month, like constantly, sometimes every day, they're putting new designs, new clothing in stores. That's way too much clothes. And if we're only wearing them 1 to 2 times, what is the imprint, the carbon footprint of those clothes after they leave someone's closet once or twice? Because a lot of people are throwing clothing away. And when you donate clothing, often it gets discarded. It doesn't actually get resold. It doesn't get used for the purpose you might think. So that's kind of what our current system looks like, is this super sped up version of a very extractive system based in petroleum, really heavily dependent on oil, coal tar, things like that. And it's just not sustainable. We're just going like this. We're going up and up and up, and that's not the way to do it. So what we see is something that looks different, and it looks like this. So what we mean by soil to soil is literally, we want to think about our textiles starting in the land. So if we start over here with our rangeland, our farmland, we're literally talking about the soil that everything comes out of. So maybe it's the sheep that are grazing the land, and you're doing it with regenerative agriculture. So it's actually sequestering carbon. The wool that those sheep produce will be climate beneficial. So we're already starting with something that is a very different type of fiber than a conventionally grown cotton. That's just tons of pesticides, so much water usage. They're tilling and stripping the fields every single season. And so what we envision is starting with that base. The soil is where the health of all of our textiles really relies. And if we treat the soil well, the rest of everything will flow into that again. So how we see a soil to system work is, we start with our soil by taking care of it, by using regenerative agricultural practices, which for grazing sheep is moving them around the way that they normally would move. So they're not eating everything all the way down to the ground. We're preventing erosion of soil that way. We're keeping beneficial plants in the area, bringing native species back in, native foods, which are also, again, impacting our ecosystem. And the way that we harvest, we're harvesting wool from our sheep. Maybe we're growing organic cotton and bast fibers. So bast fibers are things like flax, which once you process it, gets turned into linen. Maybe it's hemp, and also natural dye plants, which again, that is my specialty area, is natural dye plants. And I grow about a 1/4 acre in Northfield at a friend's farm who has sheep. And again, it's looking at, instead of using like nylon and these other materials that, again, they're plastic. You go near flame with some of those things, acrylic, nylon, it melts. It literally melts. And they say keep away from flames. And often, for a long time, and I think at least it's still now, there's certain fibers that most of us polyester have in our clothing as adults that are not allowed in children's clothing because they have to be flame retardant. And things like wool is naturally flame retardant. It extinguishes itself. So we look at the principles, we look at the strength of natural fibers, what they already inherently carry, because synthetics are modeled after natural fibers, but made out of petroleum. And so we look at those, and the way we raise them, again, we're thinking about what's the impact today, tomorrow, and 10 years from now. That's really what we're thinking about with this kind of piece of that puzzle. And also, again, with dyes, most dyes that our clothing are dyed with, it's made from coal tar. It is super damaging for waterways. A lot of times that is the water that then flows to, to go on fields where the crops that people are eating. So they're eating foods that inherently are grown with things that have all these chemicals in them. And obviously we don't see a lot of that, but there's some really amazing documentaries out there which touch on this topic. And they say that you can tell what the most popular color in fashion is by looking at the color of the waterway. So water will be fuchsia because that's the in color, or water will be red in the towns that actually do the dyeing, because that is the way that it's just, the dye is channeled right into the waterways that people use for drinking, for cleaning, and for watering their crops. And so again, we don't see that, but that's what's happening. So that's why the next part of our soil to soil system is the processing. We want to see ethical processing where waste management is considered. We're using solar to heat our water instead of using so much gas and so many other things that, again, are reliant on fossil fuels. We're thinking about capturing rainwater to use because a lot of dyeing and some of these other processes require water to wash the sheep's wool, to get rid of the lanolin. How can we look at the processing component of it and choose something different? And so in a fiber shed, after our fiber is grown on rangeland, on farmland, sustainably, we look at how can our mill system do things in a way where there isn't waste. There's zero waste facilities. Everything that's made has a purpose. So whether the wool can't be spun into yarn, can it be the inside of a quilt? Could it be something that we could felt to go on the inside of shoes? There's so many ways that we can use all the parts of fiber that we just often, manufacturers throw them away. And again, that just contributes to the waste problem we have. And so in our soil to soil system, with these local manufacturers, where again, also we're thinking about the ethics of who's working there, how they're being treated. We're looking to our local designers and makers who can cut and sew and create the garments that then, as consumers, we have access to naturally dyed, natural fiber items that are sustainable, that are ethical, that are made in silhouettes that we're not talking 52 styles, right, of clothing. What we're talking about with these designers and makers is making quality clothing. And if you think back, probably like I think about my grandparents, and you would buy one really nice thing and you would take care of it. You would take it to a tailor, you would have it repaired, or you would repair it yourself. So that's also a part, is we ask of consumers to say, darn those socks, get those holes, cover those holes up, put a patch in the knee, make those into shorts. How can we use the textiles we have and care for them and keep them out of the landfill? And then at the end of the life cycle of our garment, in a soil to soil system, because it's natural fibers, natural dyes, it can be composted. So right now, most of our textiles, when they're at the end of our life cycle, because they're petroleum based, because they have petroleum based dyes, they can't be composted. And so they just end up releasing chemicals into the groundwater, into our soil, in the landfill. But this is we view something different, where we have wool garments that we can put in our compost pile, will break down in a number of months and add health and nutrients back into the soil. And the cycle starts again, where then we take that compost and we put it on where we're growing our plants, where animals are grazing, and the cycle continues again. So this is, in a stark contrast to the very extractive kind of light speed way of looking at textiles that currently happens. This is a really different way, a much slower way, a way where we're producing only what we need. We're not overproducing, and we're also not, we're not thinking, we're not just thinking about today. We're thinking about many years from now, when this garment will break down. What is it going to bring? Goodness and nutrients to our world, or is it going to bring poison? And so we're trying to think about how can we create garments that are bringing nutrients and goodness into our world to bring flourishing for all parts of the system. So a year in the Three Rivers Fibershed, just to kind of give you an idea, this is an illustration of so our systems are also place-based, as we said, so that's strategic geography, if you can think back to that picture. So what our fiber shed looks like is different than California, which is different than Australia and different than Austria. And so for us, our spring looks like shearing sheep. That is generally in the spring when shepherds are lambing their sheep, they are shearing their sheep. We're planting our seeds. So maybe that's our dye plants. We're planting our hemp, we're getting flax in the ground, and we're getting everything ready to go. In the summertime, that's where we're grazing and rotating our sheep through. We are harvesting our dye plants, we're maintaining our flax and our hemp and things like that. And in the fall, some people shear their sheep twice. Some of the long wool breeds, they'll shear in the spring and the fall. So there is some fall shearing. We'll harvest our flax, which you can see, that's what this is. This is flax redding in the field. Flax has to go through this process where basically it breaks down the gum that holds everything together, so you can strip those fibers from it. And then this is hemp, and this is another way to process it where you actually boil it, and then again you strip the fibers. So this is what we're doing in the fall here, and in the winter we're putting our groups of sheep together for breeding. We're also putting compost down. We are, covering with mulch. We're getting everything ready. And so when we think about making a sweater, we have to go back to this actual cycle. So, like if someone buys wool in the spring from the shearing, they can wash it, they can spin it, they can knit it into a sweater. And if you try to get that wool in the summer, it might be gone. So again, it's a different way of looking at, it's working with the systems of nature and moving at the timeline of what happens in our geography, which again, this would look nothing like H&Ms would be like, we do all the things, we do all the things. It would be this like compressed into a nanosecond, right? But instead we're saying, nope, we're going to look at the way things actually function, that a sheep is shorn 1 or 2 times a year. That's when our fiber is available. Outside of that time frame, they're growing more. Like it's not available. So it's a slowed down, different way of looking at our textile systems, because they've become so hyper, just accessible at any moment. You can order a thing online from Amazon and get it at your door tomorrow, a pair of pants. But that is such a strange concept based on how humans have made textiles for hundreds of thousands of years. It looked like this, where we cultivate the animals, we cultivate the land, and that is how we get our textiles. So at our core, there are 3 kind of main principles. And so the soil-to-soil system wants to create these just local economies that, again, we're looking at human flourishing for all around local labor, local fiber. So that's again, like our wool, our flax, and then local natural dyes. And so what we do as Three Rivers Fibershed is we strive to be a resource to that whole community. So providing opportunities for connection, exploration, and just like a way to build community from those farmers who have sheep, the farmers who are growing flax, folks like me who grow dye plants, the mills we have in our area, because there still are fiber mills in our area. Actually, we're pretty blessed in that Minnesota and parts of Wisconsin, we have a fair amount of small mini mills. In some fiber sheds, they don't even have any milling equipment anymore. All of it is gone. But at least we have a number of mills and some new ones that have opened up. So we have that ability to connect shepherds who say, I have wool, but I don't know what to do with it. And some shepherds throw it away, some burn it, and it's perfectly good wool, but that isn't their focus. Maybe meat is their focus. And so by being able to connect 2 mills to say, what can we make with this? Can we blend this to make insulation that is really safe for our homes? Can we use it to fill quilts and pillows and other things so that our bedding is really safe? And then also the artists and makers, consumers, and everyone in between within that strategic geography. So again, that's kind of our focus is really on those 3: fiber, labor, and dyes. How do we connect all those pieces and be a resource to that community? And so what our mission is, it's to abolish unjust textile systems and create in their place strong, decentralized textile economies that build from the resources within our own communities. So that is why fiber sheds are so place-based. And if we had on the call, or if I had right here someone from like the Acadia fiber shed, which is in Louisiana, they are focused on brown cotton because they have a rich textile connection and history of that, and a place-based connection to brown colored cotton, green colored cotton. And so it looks really different what they're focusing on than what we're focusing on, because again, we're thinking about what is place-based, what makes sense for us. We're not going to grow cotton in Minnesota, but we can grow flax and hemp, and we can do all sorts of wools and alpaca and llama and all sorts of other animal fibers. So that's what we focus on. So before I kind of get to the end for some questions and answers, I brought up socks before. So socks and climate change, what's the connection? So I wanted to just, again, this is maybe where you take your sock off, or you look at a sock, or you think about a sock. So what we did over the last year is our fiber shed wanted to do an educational program called Soil to Sock. And we wanted to challenge participants to go from soil to a sock, and to do it all local. So to source your fiber locally, to have it milled, or to do it yourself locally, to use natural colored wool or natural dyes from plants, and then to knit, crochet, and make it into a sock. And we also talked about at the end of the life cycle of the sock, we did a session on composting completely wool socks and how you can compost them in your compost pile. And so we really wanted to challenge people to think about something, a very utilitarian item that, especially it's chilly up here in Minnesota, so we wear socks all the time. And so it's one little connection point to just start thinking about that. So with your socks in mind, do you know what it's made of? So if you have your sock with you, I should have brought a sock. I'm wearing socks, but I'm not going to take it off. But if I have my imaginary sock, what is it made of? Is it made of cotton? Is it stretchy? Is it blended with something like nylon? If it is cotton, is it organic or is it conventional? And what kind of farming methods do you think the farmers used who made that fiber? If it's wool, what way do you think the sheep were managed in order to do that? Were they confined and eat corn and soy? Or were they out grazing and moving around kind of in a herd, grazing different areas, maybe eating buckthorn, which would be great. So thinking about that as a starting place with your sock. Next, if it's a colored sock, what do you think it's dyed with? Where do those pigments come from? Are they from a plant, from a berry, from a tree, from a root, from a vine, any sort of part of a mineral, maybe a rock? Or are they man-made? Are they things like if you go to like a fabric or craft store and you see those RIT dyes, those are based in petroleum products. So those were created in a lab, and that is one of the core parts of them is petroleum. So the dye that's in those, that's bonded with that fiber, it's a molecular bond. They're glued together. What is glued to what? Is it cotton and the dye is a petroleum that's glued to it, so they're bonded? Or is it a plant pigment and a natural fiber? What do you think that might be? And then think about where and how it was made. What part of the world, and again, this is a little trickier because socks obviously don't have a tag that says made in, because that would be very scratchy and extremely uncomfortable to wear, but it would be kind of funny to see. I would kind of like to see that. But so maybe think about on shirts, other things, other items, garments you might have in your closet where it says, made in or assembled in. What part of the world was it created in? And what sort of practices do the factories follow for waste management? Where is that, the people who dyed it, where's that water going? Is that going right into the fields where all the food is being grown that feeds the folks who do it? Is it being treated? Are the chemicals being captured before they leave the factory? And what sort of, do they use coal to power everything? Do they use gas? Do they use oil? And what are the human rights within those spaces? How are people being treated? What are their rights? What are their freedoms? How are they impacted by creating a thing like a sock for us, which is an everyday item that we wear? How are they impacted by that? And how are the communities impacted? And then the last thing with your sock to think of, what happens when it gets a hole? How can you keep it out of the landfill? If you put it in a compost pile, will it break down? So kind of like we talked about with our Soil to Sock challenge, they were made of wool. It was naturally colored. The sheep grow different colors of wool. And so it was like a gray color was the one that was used in our example. And it just completely breaks down. It's just wool fiber. So if you are looking at your sock and it's, let's say it's all bright polka dot rainbows, it's probably got nylon in it. That's not going to break down. That's plastic. The color is petroleum based, so those chemicals are going to leach into the ground. And what's going to happen is the parts that might be cotton, the parts that might be a natural fiber are going to compost away. And what's going to be left is that plastic that's going to stick around for forever. And so when we do get a hole in our socks or our pants or our shirts, how can we keep it in our closets? How can we keep it from ending up in the space where it's just going to be in the landfill and it can't break down? And what it's going to do is just add to the problem that we have with our water, with our soil, with our air, with all of those pieces. So when you think about your sock and when you think about buying your next sock, consider some of these pieces as you go through looking at what kind of sock you might want to make or buy, because there are companies out there and there's lots of local fiber available if you are a knitter or a crafter, and can make your own. And there's lots of classes too about how to mend and repair things that are out there to help kind of prepare you to keep that sock in your closet. Or maybe you know someone who's very nice and would mend your sock for you. So maybe you could like bake them something. So I will just kind of pause there, and any questions kind of coming up, I can stop sharing my screen, and that way I can see all of your lovely faces, and if there's some questions we can chat through them. So yeah.
So Maddy, hey, it's Mary.
Hey Mary.
Where can we look, I do not knit, I do not sew. I do wear things to rags, so I'm good on that part. Where would you recommend buying things from? I've looked online, like I've tried to find jeans online, and it's really tough. I have found underwear. I have not focused on socks, I guess, as much as I should.
Yeah, so great question. So there are a number of groups. I know one that comes to mind is the North Star Farm Tour. They are a group that's local to Minnesota, and it's a group of different fiber farmers who kind of do like agritourism. You can come to the farm, see the animals, do some of the crafts and activities. And they worked with a local mill and blended about 6, I think, different farms together and had it knit into a sock. So it's a completely local, because we also have a knitting mill in Minnesota, which again is pretty wonderful. Thank you, Renee, she dropped in the chat. But you can buy the socks right from their website, and also often mills. So Rachel Alpaca is another mill there in Hastings, Minnesota. They sell their own alpaca wool blend socks, really soft, really lovely. They wash the wool alpaca, they spin it and make it into the socks. They have it knit locally as well. And then a number of the shepherds themselves actually will sell, like Harvest Hill Acres sells the felt insoles for your boots. They also sell socks. And so on our website, Three Rivers Fibershed, we have a steward directory, which is just a way to kind of see all sorts of different local farmers who the way that they all basically do different regenerative agriculture principles and things like that. The standard of care that they have for their animals is really high, and they're really committed to kind of that whole vision of a different textile system. And you can go to their websites and see directly from them who has socks. But fiber festivals are another good way. Like Shepherd's Harvest Festival is probably the one that's coming up next. It's in May, and it's out in Lake Elmo at the Washington County Fairgrounds. And you can talk right to the shepherd and get your pair of socks. And a lot of times those socks have a sheep name attached to them. Those are like Bumblebee, and you can do it that way. So there's a number of ways. And I thank you, Renee, for dropping those things in the chat, because that'll help folks kind of find some of those things. Yeah.
Awesome. I think I raised my hand for a quick question. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes.
Great presentation. Loved it. Really insightful. Two questions come to mind. The first one is, typically, how long does it take, kind of knowing the cycle of the whole entire kind of like ecosystem, like how long does it take to make a garment? I mean, if you think of a sock, you think of a sweater from kind of your point of view. And my second question would be, in terms of the mission, which is to kind of like, break the generational cycles of how manufacturing in today's world is, like, what do you think it's going to take for like this movement to like grow beyond just kind of local connections to something a little bit more grandiose, like selling to corporations that want more sustainable, mission-driven initiatives?
Yeah, so the first question, kind of that timeline for, like, let's say a sweater. If we were to do it like as an individual, so like I go out and I get a fleece in April from my friend who shears in April, and I get it to a mill, a local mill, who's going to wash it and make it into yarn for me so then I can knit it. Because I'm a very slow spinner, so I don't want to do it by hand. I'm going to leave it to the professionals. So usually our mills have a big wait list, 6 months, sometimes a year or more. So, and the reason is because there's so few that will do at a small scale, where you don't have to come in with saying, I have 1,000 pounds of raw wool to process. A lot of the bigger groups, kind of in the Carolinas, where we have more of that infrastructure still for textiles, that's where those mid-range groups are, where they will do bigger runs, get things out the door, but you have to have the quantity. So if I, as an individual or a small group, and we just had like 100, 200 pounds, I'd be looking at one of the smaller local mills, and that's probably going to be that 6-month window to year and a half, sometimes, to get that from my raw wool back to me as yarn, and then to knit it. So, and if we, again, then look too at, if I take that yarn and say, I want socks made, like at the knitting mill, similar kind of concept of, they have their own wait time. And again, that's one of the big bottlenecks of local textile economies, is milling infrastructure. Equipment is expensive. It's often overseas. People who know how to use it are far and few between. And a lot of times, if you get equipment and you make that big investment, if things break, it's not easy to find replacement pieces. Oftentimes it's asking someone who's an engineer saying, do you know how to fix this? Can you figure out what piece we could use to put in place here? So even though we have some mills, there's still so many constraints on mills. And being even able to find folks who want to work in the mill and build that skill set, build that knowledge, is also pretty tricky. So I'm like, I know some folks who do everything from hand. So they get the fleece in the spring, they go to Shepherd's Harvest in May, they buy the fleece, they wash it, they spin it, and then they knit it. And maybe they would do it in a couple of months. But if we're talking about kind of like, I'm going to do a run of 50 sweaters, I'm probably looking at that year to a year and a half at least. It's a pretty long timeline comparatively to now, where it's a couple weeks, if that much. And to your second question, kind of like, what do we need to kind of get to that next level, to move beyond just grassroots to where we can go to a store and see these types of textiles accessible. And one of the big pieces is infrastructure. So really seeing the types of investments in mills like if Faribault, they make Faribault products, right? But they don't make things for other people. I couldn't go there and say, hey, would you weave fabric for me so I could cut and sew jackets? They would be like, no, that's not what they do. So what we're missing is we're missing some of those intermediary pieces where people have the skill sets, the tools, and can take on a run of doing like 50 pieces. So, and even having local textiles available right now. Again, if an artist or a designer came to me and said, hey, I want to make a run of dresses for the spring using local wool, I would say, cool, you need to buy fleeces, you need to take them to a mill, have them washed, spun into yarn, then you're going to take them to a mill and have them knit into fabric, and then we can talk like you making something. So we just getting the raw materials into fabric, into yarn, having natural dyes that are at a scale where it's not me and my flowers in a pot and saying, well, I expect everyone to dye all their stuff at home. There's a really good example of this in Kentucky. There is a group, and now maybe Renee, you know the name, I'm blanking on it. They have been working on creating a natural indigo for dyeing textiles, because everything is synthetic indigo now. But they have secured contracts with Levi's because they got a bunch of like funding, and they also were in an area where there is that infrastructure already built in. So they were able to buy the equipment, they were able to hire the people, and now they're able to actually dye, at a Levi's scale, which is huge. But again, that was tons of capital, millions and millions of dollars invested into this idea and this business. Stony Creek Colors, that's what it is, Stony Creek Colors. And also helping transition farmers who grew tobacco into growing indigo. So they also have the climate where they can grow and the infrastructure for harvesting. So it's about changing the crops, changing the infrastructure. And again, that's a lot of money. It's statewide support, it's federal support. It has to be these really big kind of pushes to say, we want to see this and we're going to fund this, because otherwise it's individuals getting some milling equipment and going, I can do 300 pounds a week, and it's like, that's once you wash it, that ends up being 150, and that's not a lot. So yeah, does that answer the question kind of? Okay. Yeah, are there other questions?
Is there any way that we could tell just by looking at materials which is the best way to go? I suppose that's the challenge right now, right? Do we go with organic cotton? Do we go with wool? Do we wait for the trees to start producing it cheaper?
Yeah, I would say the process that is the most transparent and the least complicated is probably going to yield a product that is in its most basic form able to then be broken down again. So for me, that's wool, because I can see the wool grow on a sheep. We can shear it off. I'm going to wash it, spin it, knit it into a sock, and I know exactly everything. I know some folks are sensitive to wool. Yes, exactly. So what I would recommend then is looking at things like organic cotton, things that are recycled. There's also a lot of really amazing recycled blends out there. where they're taking that waste product, so diverting it from our landfills and blending it with new organic cotton as well, and bringing in things like linen or bringing in others, natural fibers again to kind of build that strength. So I would play around, and I know if your opinion of wool is very scratchy socks, there's a whole spectrum of wool out there, and the scratchiness is the size of the scale on the individual follicle, and it varies based on the breed. So maybe just find one that's got some smaller scales and you won't feel it as much. That's for me, that's what I've found is I'm wearing my wool long johns right now. So, but yeah.
I know with the cows, you worry about the emissions and the methane they generate. Oh, is there an issue with that with the sheep?
Yeah, so there are similar in terms of they're both ruminant animals, and so they do produce some methane, but these specifically sheep, goats, like those critters, they are smaller, and also the way that they're managed by like the shepherds who are a part of Fibershed, they're always moving, and so it's really a natural quality of the sheep as well, but it's about the management as the shepherd, and that's where I think as we think about climate change, we often think about our impact, but our impact can also be so beneficial that it is actually making that smaller. And so the way that our shepherds, they run the different animals, they'll have different paddocks. So they'll put up fencing and rotate them through, and they're never grazing an area too long. Manure is being spread out. So it's composting, it's keeping parasites down. So we're not using a bunch of antibiotics. And so generally, once you look at how the whole ecosystem works, the net benefit is positive with sheep, as compared to, if you got your wool from a bunch of sheep that were just fenced in on like a CAFO, or, on dirt, and you were just feeding them corn, hay, things like that, it probably would not balance out in terms of the impact of that wool. But again, that's where we go back to management. And that's where, as people, we have the most opportunity to create a really dynamic, positive impact in a relationship with those pieces. So yes, they are like cows, and yes, they can actually heal the environment around them. And a lot of them love eating buckthorn. So, they're out there, they're eating buckthorn, they're growing climate beneficial wool, and those are the socks I want to wear.
Great presentations. Really appreciate it.
Yep.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thanks for coming.
Thank you.